Mount Everest. Standing at 8,850 meters, the mountain has stirred the imagination and courage of man for centuries. Hundreds have died trying to climb to its summit, and now a city slicker with a borrowed sleeping bag but a lot of heart is about to attempt to trek to its third base camp. This is the Everest Podcast.
Welcome to episode 9 of the Everest Podcast. My name is Erick, and I'm your host for this podcast series. Thanks for listening in. So today is the day that we drove early morning from Kathmandu, across the border into Tibet. Big day. Kind of an interesting day, risky day. I never thought we'd actually get into Tibet, especially before September the 5th, given all the drama that went on 2 weeks leading up to our departure. But I'm happy to say that I'm currently sitting safe and sound in Tibet, and all limbs intact, all of my personal items and luggage with me still. Didn't run into any Maoist revolutionaries in Nepal along the way. So all is well. So far, so good. What I want to do today is actually just go through some of the highlights of the day. There are a few to cover because the journey from Kathmandu to Tibet was pretty interesting. There are some beautiful sceneries to describe, but also some interesting events. Why don't I just begin by talking about the leg from Kathmandu to the border of Tibet. The ride basically kicked off with us boarding a small little minibus and driving over to the Tibet border. To get there, we had to take the Friendship Highway, which really is kind of a stretch because it's not so much a highway as it is a dirt path ridden with rocks that will eventually lead you to Nepal, or rather to Tibet. But you better make sure that your car is in pretty decent shape with good suspension. Otherwise, you're in trouble. We had a pretty bumpy ride. This was to be expected. Nevertheless, it was still bumpy. We were also stopped along the way probably a good 20 times or so by military checkpoints that were controlled by the Nepal military. In fact, in our 2 days now in Nepal, these military checkpoints were pretty much the only big reminder that the country is still very much in a civil war with Maoist revolutionaries. When you're actually in Kathmandu, you see only a few indications of this. There are some soldiers around the airport, there's some soldiers in major tourist areas, but otherwise they keep a pretty low profile. When you're driving on the Friendship Highway, though, they are sort of scattered throughout your journey, and probably every 30-45 minutes or so you'll come across another checkpoint, which are just surrounded by barbed wire, guard towers, or guard shacks, and men with very big guns. So that was pretty interesting, but we got through just fine. We never ran across any Maoist revolutionaries. There are stories of tourists who get pulled over by these Maoists. They aren't really threatened or harmed ever, really, with a few exceptions. Instead, the revolutionaries ask for a toll to help them fund their revolution. And the funny thing, or the ironic thing, is in return you actually get a receipt from the Maoists for your quote-unquote donation to the revolution. So a lot of tourists will actually end up treating these receipts as souvenirs. So part of me was actually looking forward a little bit to the experience, just to say we ran into some revolutionaries and got a receipt from them. But a much larger part of me was very grateful that we never had to deal with that kind of a situation. But the drive to the border was pretty uneventful. It took about 4.5 hours. But just as soon as we got to the China border, that's when things started getting just a little bit interesting. Getting into China is never, it seems, a very straightforward process. We had all our paperwork with us. Nevertheless, we had to go through a number of different steps, meet with a number of different people just to get across. There was one individual who sprayed all our luggage with some sort of a chemical, which makes me really worried because he was wearing a full white protective suit and a mask, while we were sitting here in our t-shirts, sandals, and basically just rubbing all these. Basically, like they sprayed my bag and my backpack, and then I put the backpack right back on me. And I just questioned how safe this really could be, but probably wasn't worth questioning the guy. I'm not sure how much more trouble that would have caused. But there's that one guy, and then there's another guy who, a doctor of some sort, who then takes your temperature. You want to make sure that you're not sick and bringing any diseases into their beloved country. Then there's another guy who checks your Tibet permit. There's another guy who checks your passport. So this whole drawn-out process, and that's actually just to get across the border before you hit immigration, where they actually scan your passport and stamp it and do all that sort of entry crap. So very long, drawn-out process, but we finally get through, and just as we step foot across the border, it starts to rain, and it starts to rain hard. Again, I don't know if this is an omen of any sort, but I hope it isn't. But it rains and rains, and our luggage got soaked, which is pretty. That was a shame. We weren't really prepared for that, so I didn't put any of the rain covers over my bags. Things got soaked through, which really sucks. But the really surprising thing was, as we were crossing the border, we met up with our Tibetan guide. So now we have our Sherpas, our Tibetan guide, our two drivers, a Jeep driver and a truck driver. So our little family is now complete. But as we're walking across the border with all the luggage in hand, they suddenly turn off the road and start hiking up this muddy dirt path through this forest. And it's a very steep climb, and I'm wearing flip-flops because, well, no one told me that I had to go and do any hiking right across the border in China. So here we are, having just crossed the border into China, having gone through all these different checkpoints and immigration, and all of a sudden we're hiking through these woods, and it's feeling very sketchy, first of all, but more importantly, I'm slipping in my flip-flops. It's like rocky terrain, it's raining, we're soaked, I'm miserable, and it's steep. So it's definitely quite a surprise for us to have to actually do a hike just as soon as we cross the border, with no forewarning whatsoever. When we finally get to the top, we meet up with our vehicles and we throw our bags in there. And I asked our guide, I was like, is this normal? Apparently there is a road that will take you up to where we were supposed to get, but I guess because of the rain they thought that they could take this shortcut. But I'm not really sure if it was really worth all that much to risk life and limb, it seems, hiking up this muddy slope, which took about 15 minutes to climb, by the way, rather than just climbing down, sort of walking up along a road. Nevertheless, we get into our Jeeps safe and sound, and it feels great. We're definitely professional looking, at least, definitely not prepared professionally, but we look professional. We've got a Land Cruiser and a giant truck for all our gear, and we've got a staff now of 5 people, 2 drivers, 2 Sherpas, and a Tibetan guide. So I'm feeling pretty good. The drive, though, from the border deeper into Tibet is rough. It's raining pretty hard. The turns, the road takes us basically into the mountains. Again, there's no paving. There's just this dirt path ridden with rocks. We get probably one of the oldest, crappiest Land Cruisers still in existence. The air doesn't work. The windows completely fog up, and there's a leak in the roof over our luggage in the trunk. So it's definitely been an interesting, let's say, 1-hour introduction to China and the China leg of our tour. But no complaints. We'll take it as it comes. The road into China was interesting. Hairpin turns, lots and lots of indications of landslides everywhere we look. So definitely we have to keep an eye out for that as well, especially given the rains that are coming down. Our driver, who only speaks Mandarin, so I'm glad that my shoddy conversational Mandarin skills are finally coming into play and being useful. He only speaks Mandarin, so that basically means that I'm the translator for the group. Our driver loves to, for whatever reason, tell these stories of people dying. He doesn't say very much. He's a quiet guy, but when he does talk, all he really talks about is stories of how people died along this road that we're driving on. So one such story was how at this one hairpin turn that we're just turning around as he's telling this story, is of a truck that was filled with 9 people that took the turn too fast, drove off the cliff, and plummeted to their death down this gorge, and all 9 people died in the truck. I was like, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Just 1 hour later, we drive by this house, which has been completely demolished by giant boulders. And it turns out that just less than a year ago, a huge landslide from atop a mountain came crashing down and took out this house and killed 3 people in their sleep. So again, our guide, our driver, amazes us with his knowledge of death along the Friendship Highway, and I think to myself, this is going to be a long trip, but hopefully entertaining. So the drive to our first destination in China, in Tibet, is definitely eventful, but it could have been a lot worse. Speaking of our first destination, it's a city called Nyalam, spelled Nayalam. It is really just a small little town that sort of appears out of nowhere as you're driving along the Friendship Highway, and then disappears as quickly as it appeared. Just a few stretches of maybe 50 buildings or so stretched just along the Friendship Highway. You know, the whole purpose of the city is really just sort of an in-transit little town as people head deeper into Tibet. There are 2 hotels in town. Both of them are very, very basic by communist China standards. My room is 8 by 8 feet, and there's no bathroom. There's only a common bathroom. And I won't go into great detail describing this bathroom for you, but for people who have been to China before, you may be familiar with these toilets, which are really just a hole in the ground. There's no toilet paper or nothing. And there's no flush. It's just a hole in the ground with a big plastic bucket of some sort of water. And what you do is, when you're done with your business, you gotta take this little cup that's floating in this bucket of water, scoop up some water, and that's your flush water right there in your hand. So, not the most luxurious conditions, but again, you know, this comes with a trek. I was expecting this, so, you know, we take it as it comes. One thing to definitely mention about the trip from Kathmandu into Tibet is the scenery. As we got closer and closer to the mountains, the scenery got just unbelievable. It was almost magical. We're driving through these mountainous valleys. The views are of these very lush green mountainsides with just, it seems, thousands of these giant waterfalls crashing and cascading from these mountain cliffs. And I'm telling you, for those of you who haven't been here and have been to places like to Hawaii or been to South America, those waterfalls that you've seen don't even compare to the ones that are scattered all throughout the valleys of the mountains between Nepal and Tibet. These waterfalls are just mind-blowing. Some of them cascade for more than, it seems, 1,000 feet and just come crashing down from way up on high. And it's just a magical scene. And when you look straight down these valleys, you see these waterfalls left and right, staggered, and it's almost like everywhere you turn, it's another postcard, and you want to take another picture, which is what I did. But so definitely check out the website that I've created for this trip for some examples of these photos of these waterfalls. When we finally arrive in Nyalam, we're suddenly at just a little over 12,000 feet, and let me tell you, you can feel the altitude already. We climbed again from Kathmandu, which is just under 4,400 feet, And now that we're sitting at just a little over 12,000 feet, having ascended almost 8,000, you can definitely feel the difference. And when you're sitting in a Jeep driving over to Nyalam, you don't really notice that much. But when you step out and you start taking a few steps, it hits you. And let me tell you that when we got into our hotel, we're actually on the 3rd floor. So after climbing 2 flights of steps, I was winded, especially carrying a few pieces of luggage with me. So I'm hoping that in our next day here in Nyalam, which is going to be just a full day of rest and acclimatization, we'll be able to start getting a little more used to this high altitude. Because we're going to 21,000 feet, so we better get used to 12,000 really fast. Now for the last segment of this podcast, the Listen to Eric as he gets stupider segment. Let me just go and repeat some of these tongue twisters. At 12,000 feet, I'm not sure if you're going to hear that much of a difference, but we'll see. First tongue twister. I am a mother pheasant plucker. I pluck mother pheasants. I am the best mother pheasant plucker that ever plucked a mother pheasant. I am a mother pheasant plucker. I pluck mother pheasants. I am the best mother pheasant plucker that ever plucked a mother pheasant. Second tongue twister. Stan Lopowski's little sister is a syphilitic thistle sifter. Stan Lopowski's little sister is a syphilitic thistle sifter. Third tongue twister. Blue glue gun, green glue gun. Blue glue gun, green glue gun. Blue glue gun, green glue gun. Alright, probably not a big difference yet, or if any, but we'll see. Tomorrow we're going to spend a full day acclimatizing, so we'll repeat these tongue twisters. But the day after we're going to go head up to Rongbuk, which is actually over 17,000 feet, and maybe there we'll start hearing some of a difference, so stay tuned. Those are the highlights for my day here traveling from Kathmandu into Tibet. Happy to be in Tibet. Happy for you guys to be joining me and listening in. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Everest podcast.
For more information on Erick's Everest trek, as well as photos from his trip, please visit his website at www.everestpodcast.com.